Good evening, gentlemen. Tonight, God willing, we are going to finish chapter 5 of the second part of the Tanya. We just have a few more lines left to read, but as we know from past experience, sometimes several lines can take a long time to finish. What have we been discussing, right? Chapter 5 is a continuation of chapter 4. We're discussing the way God creates the world. More specifically, why is it that even though the entire world is totally non-existent within godliness, like the ray of the sun and the sun, even though everything is really just an expression of godliness and has no independent reality whatsoever, everything is godliness, we don't see it. Why is that? Because God creates the world not just with Shem Havaya, which is a self-revelation, right, in which he expresses himself and godliness is revealed, but also with Shem Elokim, in which he conceals himself. There's two actions, so to speak, that go into the creation of everything. And that's basically what we've been speaking about, that Elokim is what creates the experience in each and every creation, that it's an independent reality from Hashem. Right? And everything is created with Havaya and Elokim together. Elokim shapes and gives form to, right? And makes that Shem Havaya expresses in a way that we don't experience the Shem Havaya in anything, right? We experience only an independent reality. Everything seems to exist on its own terms. I have a cup, I have a table, and we don't see the godliness that's within everything. At the beginning of chapter 5, we said that the story is actually a little bit more complicated, because in the creation of the world there's also revelation of Shem Havaya within the creation of the world as well. So it's not just Havaya through Elokim. It's not just that everything is created by Elokim shaping and concealing Shem Havaya. There's also a little bit, in a way, there's a Shem Havaya revealed in everything as well. And how is this so? We explained that God mixed Midas HaRachamim, he mixed his mercy into the creation of the world, right? Such that he saw that if the world was created just with Elokim and Havaya together, with Elokim concealing Havaya, the world would not be able to sustain itself if he was completely hidden from it. So he revealed himself in the world to some extent. In what way did he reveal himself? He revealed himself, we said, through the tzaddikim and through the miracles. Right? Through the righteous people and also through the miracles, through the breaking the bounds of nature, Hashem reveals himself even within the world, right? And we explained that this is not an afterthought to the world's creation. This was there, present from the very beginning of the creation of the entire world, right? We explained how the reason, the way in which God is revealed in the world is because the world, the creation of the world, the 10 utterances by which the world is created, is not just things that Hashem says, but they're also part of Torah. And by being part of Torah, this allows that the world also has an aspect in which God is fully revealed in it, right? And this, we've been using this idea to explain a number of things. We spoke about how this explains why when there's a miracle, right, when God, so to speak, removes Shem Elokim, when he reveals Shem Havaya in its purity, right, the world does not cease to exist. Right, we said an interesting fact, right? We had a whole class on miracles recently, right? On the Hanukkah oil, the splitting of the sea, all sorts of different miracles. When God makes the miracle of the splitting of the sea, the water does not cease to exist, right? When the Jews are at the sea, they don't see, the water does not disappear to be replaced by godliness, right? It's not that they just saw godliness. They saw water, and the water is what splits, right? But how can that be if a miracle is Hashem revealing himself, if a miracle is Shem Elokim being removed, right? And the entire existence of the water is only because Shem Elokim is there. If the water only exists as an independent reality, as we just said 2 minutes ago, because of Shem Elokim, then when Shem Elokim is removed, the water should cease to exist. Right? It should be only godliness. We should see how the water is part of the Dvar Havaya, the words Mayim, right? Like the ray of the sun and the sun, that the water has no reality of its own. And all that should be here is godliness, but that's not what happens. Even though there's a miracle, and even when Shem Havaya is revealed, the water continues to exist, right? How can this be? And the answer is, because the water is not created only from Shem Elokim concealing and forming Shem Havaya, but also from Shem Havaya itself, right? We say this is the aspect that it was part of the Torah that it was created, right? That from the beginning, the water is created with Shem Havaya involved, with a godly revelation involved. And we explained how this is really connected to the idea that God made a condition with the creation, right? It said God made the water on condition that when the Hebrews are going to show up on the shores of the Yam Suf, of the Sea of Reeds, right? When the Jews are going to show up there, the water is going to split, right? And we explained how the whole idea of a Torah Tanai, the whole idea of a conditional in the Torah is that it's effective retroactively, right? In other words, if the water does not agree that it exists also in miraculous ways, then it cannot exist in natural ways, right? God made the world in the first place, right, with the Midas Harachamim. Everything that is natural also has the capacity to express Havaya in its purest form, to express miracles, to express God, right, and yet remain in existence. So we've made our picture since chapter 4 a little bit more complex. It's not just Havaya as it's being shaped by Shem Elokim that creates everything. There is also the fact that everything has an existence as part of Torah as well. And the fact that it has an existence as part of Torah allows for Shem Havaya in its purest sense to be expressed through it, through tzaddikim, through the righteous, and through nisim, through miracles, right? Eses u'mofsim, signs and wonders. Last week we had a very difficult shir, we had a very difficult class. But in the summary, it's very simple, right? We don't want to get too lost in the details. We went into a very detailed and a whole system of metaphors to try and explain how our understanding has been progressing. But the simple summary of last week's class is we asked a very simple question. And that's really what chapter 5 is. We're just resolving and sort of explaining the impact of all of these, of the fact that it's Elokim forming Havaya. And we're basically explaining that, how that impacts several other questions. In other words, the Alter Rebbe is raising issues with that understanding, and he's answering the questions. So the first issue that was raised is, we see that the trait of mercy is mixed into the world, and we just explained what that means. That the world is also a part of Torah. There is a bit of the miraculous in nature as well, in other words, right? Then there's a second question, which is, if tzaddikim, right, have this otherworldly perspective, this perspective from beyond Shem Elokim, right, this perspective from beyond the concealment of Elokim, if the tzaddikim, if the righteous really reveal Shem Havaya, if they live at the level of Havaya, that they see the godliness in everything, right? Then, on the contrary, what is the tzaddik's mitzvahs? That was the question we were dealing with last week, right? Because again, the whole idea of a mitzvah is that we take a world which is in some way separate from Hashem and we reconnect it with Hashem. That's what a mitzvah is in Chassidus, right? But if I'm at the place where I don't see how anything is separate from Hashem, if I don't see Shem Elokim, if I don't see that aspect of godliness which is concealing and forming and hiding the godliness from everyone, if there is no concealment from my eyes, then what is a mitzvah? How can I be connecting the world with godliness? How can that be my goal if I see everything as godliness inherently? This is the fundamental lesson of the question of last week's class. And the answer to the question we gave in terms of Moshe Rabbeinu, that even Moshe Rabbeinu, right, it's a kal v'chomer. If we know it's true by Moshe, all the more so it must be true by lesser prophets, because as we know, in Judaism, Moshe is the greatest of all prophets, whose prophecy will never be surpassed, right, which is why we celebrate Hanukkah and not Christmas, l'chaim. L'havdil. Moshe Rabbeinu is the greatest of all prophets. And even Moshe Rabbeinu, at the time of his prophecy, the Alter Rebbe says, to make it even stronger, not Moshe Rabbeinu at other times, but even Moshe Rabbeinu, as he is receiving his prophecy, which we know that he was the only prophet who, so to speak, spoke to God face to face. He received his prophecy when he was awake and not in a dream. He saw with what's called the aspaklaria me'ira, right? He saw with the clear viewing glass, and the others saw only with there's all different metaphors for how Moshe's prophecy was greater, but the bottom line is that even Moshe Rabbeinu, at the time of his prophecy, does not see Shem Havaya. He does not see the chesed of Atzilus, right? God's kindness, this pure, infinite revelation of godliness as it truly is. He sees it only as it's invested in the lower revelations of godliness, and even then, as those lower revelations transfer into the world of Bria, into one of the lower of the spiritual worlds, not the highest, where godliness is truly revealed, but through Bria. So even the highest prophet, right, we want to say, does not truly see Shem Havaya as it is, right? The bottom line is that no matter how holy an earthly prophet is, they are still a person who has a physical body. They are still an existence, so to speak. And for an existence to truly understand non-existence is impossible. That's basically the bottom line of last week. That even Moshe Rabbeinu, for whom Shem Elohim does not conceal as much, right? Even he does not see these things as they are in truth, right? It's God alone. If you could understand these things, you would, so to speak, be God. And even Moshe Rabbeinu in his prophecy does not see this pure and infinite godly revelation.
It was his decision. Because the discussion that he had with God, God was saying, if I'm going to tell you, then you have to be deceased. So he actually chose not to.
Very famous midrash, very famous sikha, a whole discussion that Moshe Rabbeinu basically chose, which is what makes him the paradigm of every tzaddik, what makes him the paradigm of every holy Jewish leader, what makes him the mold by which we measure all our other leaders, is that he chose a relationship with the people over the ultimate relationship with God. Right? This is the famous teaching. He chose, if God was willing to reveal himself in the ultimate way to Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu said, if you do that, then I'll have no connection to the people. So Moshe chose, in a sense, he chose the people over God in an important way, and in that sense, Moshe Rabbeinu marks the paradigm for all Rebbes, right? For all great tzaddikim, for all great leaders of the Jewish people, who we know are not just, so to speak, on God's side, but are on the side of the Jewish people and are there to bring the two together, right? As it describes that Moshe Rabbeinu was really the what's it called? He was the marriage attendant, right, who brought God to the marriage with Jewish people, and Aaron was the one who brought the Jewish people up to God, right, and they brought the bride and groom and bring the two together, right, from the higher position rather than from the lower position, but nevertheless, that is his role. That was last week. This week we have a different question. This is the final part of chapter 5, Chaim. Final part of chapter 5, we're going to ask another question. So we had the question, tzaddikim seem to be able to see through past Shem Elohim, so how can they still have mitzvahs? And the answer fundamentally is that a tzaddik is still in existence. In other words, they have high prophecy and there's lots of explanations and they see many lofty things, but even they don't truly grasp with and unify with this level of godliness. So now we have another question, not from the tzaddikim, but as we're going to see, from the souls in Gan Eden, right? From the souls in the Garden of Eden is going to be our final question, the final thing we need to understand in light of the Tzimtzum, right? Now, in order to understand this, we have to point out a couple of things. First of all, why is Gan Eden a bigger question than a tzaddik, right? The question is going to be that the souls in the Garden of Eden, right, they perceive godliness directly in a very profound way. And the question is going to be, how can the souls in the Garden of Eden be creations and yet still perceive godliness, right? If we just said that even Moshe and his prophecy is a creation, because he's ultimately still a creation, he can't perceive godliness entirely, how can we say that the souls in the Garden of Eden apprehend and grasp godliness in this profound way, if they are also a creation, right? So first of all, it's important to understand.
Garden of Eden is also a creation.
First of all, it's important to understand that the way that the souls apprehend godliness is much more profound and much deeper than the way anyone apprehends godliness in the world. In other words, it's important to note, because what's the root of the question, right? We just answered by Moshe Rabbeinu, right? We said even Moshe Rabbeinu can't grasp it, right? But the truth is that any grasp of godliness in this world is really only a grasp of the effect of godliness, right? Ultimately, even when a person sees a miracle, right? Even if you're at the splitting of the sea and you're at Kriyas Yamsuf, right? And the water stands like a wall on either side and you could walk through the seabed. And clearly the water is not obeying the rules of nature, which is what a miracle is, right? The way that the miracle points to God, just as we've been explaining, right? The way the miracle points to God is not that you have a direct apprehend, right? They still see water. It's not like they saw godliness, right? They saw water. The wonder is so powerful. The fact that the natural order is so broken, right, and so changed, and that what we as human beings normally assume is impossible, right? I'm reminded always of the of how before the fall of the Soviet Union, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Rebbe was telling people months in advance that they must prepare, that the wall is coming down, right? And nobody believed it, basically, right? There was no worldly explanation, fundamentally. Gorbachev says this, he says that, whatever. No one could see that everything was crumbling, basically, and going to fall apart overnight. And the Rebbe was already telling people in Israel to prepare housing for the thousands and thousands of Soviet Jews who are going to be moving to Eretz Yisrael in the coming months. And nobody could believe it. And then what happens, basically, is that the assumptions of the whole world, right, are in one moment the assumptions of the whole world, everything that your worldview sits on, right? How much of people's worldview was based on the Cold War and the two superpowers and everything, and everyone's assumptions in 1 second just get turned around in one night, in one moment, right? It's the same with every miracle, right? Every miracle is fundamentally the same, some more, some less, but that's the sign of a miracle, right? You assume that water behaves one way, and God shows you that the way that things behave is not how they have to behave, right? They can behave in a different way. Surprise, right? This is not the boundary of reality. Nature is not the last say. There's someone that has a higher say, right? But the someone is seen by inference. You see water and you see that the rules are broken, and that points your mind and points your understanding towards God. Right? But it's not a direct apprehension of the Creator. You see the difference? Right? It's something unusual which tells your mind that there must be a God and I am seeing His hand work right in front of me. I'm seeing what He's done. But what are you ultimately seeing? You're seeing what He's done. Right? You're not grasping godliness directly. You're seeing the effect of, when you see the miracle, generally speaking, you're seeing the effect of the miracle, not the miracle itself, right? In fact, if you want to connect it back to our Hanukkah class, the whole idea of the Hanukkah miracle was because of its contradictory nature, you could see the miracle at every moment, right? But most miracles, that's not even really a miracle, that's miracle and nature together. You can remember that class and you'll connect all the dots. But the bottom line is that a miracle, generally speaking, you see the effect. You don't see the miracle itself, right? Gan Eden is not like that. The souls in the Garden of Eden do not see the effect of godliness, right? They directly grasp godliness, as we're going to read, right? They have a direct, deep relationship with God's self-expression. And yet, they are able to do this in a world. Because as we know, the Garden of Eden, Gan Eden, is not the Garden of Eden is a place, is one way of putting it, right? In other words, it's a spiritual realm. It's a holy place. It's a place where souls enjoy godliness. But ultimately, it's a place. It's a world. The first part of Tanya, I believe, in chapter 39, says that Gan Eden is in Olam HaBriah, right? It's in a created world, right? It's in the second highest of the spiritual worlds, is where the souls go to Gan Eden, to the Garden of Eden. And there they directly apprehend godliness. And this seems to be a contradiction. How can it be that in the world, which is the Garden of Eden, in a limited reality, they nevertheless grasp godliness? right? Seems to be a contradiction. A limited being should not be able to grasp these infinite revelations of God, right, which are beyond all limitation. The yesh should not be able to grasp the ayin. The something should not be able to grasp the nothing. Right? So it's even more of a question than Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, despite being the greatest of all prophets, is still seeing metaphors for godliness. He's experiencing things within the worlds, right? He's experiencing lower revelations. He experiences the world of Atzilus only as it expresses in the world of Bria, which means, in plain English, he sees something that is a vessel for godliness, but he doesn't see the godliness itself. Right? The souls in the Garden of Eden, of the great tzaddikim, the souls of tzaddikim in the Garden of Eden, perceive godliness itself. And that's the question. The question is, how can you be a creation and yet grasp godliness itself? Or to put it slightly differently, if for them there doesn't seem to be any Shem Elokim, then how can they still exist in the world of Bria? That's the question. How can they still exist? So let's read a little bit. Bottom of page 873. Rak shematan scharam. In the Hebrew. Bottom of 873 in the English. Rak shematan scharam. It is only the tzaddikim. Yes? Zok the Heilige Alter Rebbe. The Holy Alter Rebbe says, Rak shematan scharam shel tzaddikim began Eden. It is, however, the reward of the tzaddikim, of the righteous, in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden, who hasagas hahispashtos hachayos va'ar, is understanding or grasping the extension of the divine life force and the divine light. Hanimshach mishtei midos elu, which is drawn from these two divine attributes, chesed ugvura, kindness and severity, kindness and judgment. Vahu. So what do the souls? What is their reward? Their reward is grasping the expression of this divine expression, the divine expression of Chesed and Gvura, right? The expression of the two traits that we've spent the last two chapters saying no one can grasp. Right? That's the contradiction. How can they, as a creation, grasp these divine attributes which are as ungraspable and as infinite as God himself? Vahu, and says the Alter Rebbe, the question is even stronger. Why? Because their reward is mazay neshamas hatzadikim, the food of the souls of the righteous. She'asku b'Torah lishma be'elam hazeh, who toiled in Torah for its own sake in this world. Right, that's on page 874. I'm reading.
Wait a minute.
So it's not just that they are rewarded with a perception of godliness, right? The question is even stronger. It's not that the soul in the Garden of Eden, the soul of the righteous, who studied Torah for its own sake, which we'll get to that in a second, it's not just that they perceive godliness. It's that they eat godliness. It's their mazain. It's their zanum farnes. It's their nourishment. Very good. It's their thank you. It's their it becomes their inner vitality. In other words, what's the emphasis? The emphasis is that it becomes one with them. Right? Where else in Tanya do we talk about this? Learning Torah Lishma. Which chapter? For a wafer. Chapter 5 of Tanya, the first part of Tanya. The Alter Rebbe speaks about the quality of learning Torah and what Torah has that's so special above all the mitzvahs, right? The mitzvahs he compares to one metaphor and the Torah compares to the other. Who knows what mitzvah in chapter 4, what the Alter Rebbe says a mitzvah is like in chapter 4 of Tanya? What's the metaphor? What's the mashal? Any takers? The Alter Rebbe says in chapter 4 that doing a mitzvah is like hugging the king, right? And the mitzvah is like the king's clothes, and that no matter how many layers of clothes the king is wearing, you're still embracing the king, right, through all of those layers, right? The mitzvahs are compared to the limbs of the king, and doing a mitzvah is like embracing the king, and no matter how many layers of clothes there are, right? Because the mitzvah comes down, as is explained there, in all of these different layers. But no matter how many layers you embrace the king through, how much clothes he's wearing, you're still embracing the king.
You hold the clothes, you hold the king.
Then he goes to chapter 5, and he says that Torah is different. Torah is not like clothes. Torah is like food, that food becomes your flesh and blood, just like yourself, right? And he explains over there, he calls Torah, he says that the Jew's mind's unity with Torah is a yichud nifla she'ein yichud kameyu. He says it is a wondrous unity that no unity is comparable to it in the world, because it's only in spiritual matters, really in matters of the mind, that your mind and the thing that you think about become one. Right? Which is why it's like food. Because when you learn Torah, when you do a mitzvah, right? When you put on tefillin, the act of tefillin remains external to you, right? The tefillin is something that you do, right? Torah, in a profound way, because it's spiritual, because you learn Torah in an intellectual process, right? Because you do it with your mind, which has capabilities that your body does not have, right? Your mind is spiritual. Your mind is able to take on the forms of things and become things in a way that's very different than the body. That's what makes the intellect special, right? Your mind doesn't just do Torah. Your mind, when you are thinking the thoughts of Torah, right, and when you are thinking of the words of Torah, your mind and Torah literally become one. Your mind is a place where the Torah is, just as real as it is in the book or in the Sefer Torah that we read on Shabbos, right? Your mind becomes an object of Torah. Mitzvahs are objects that you do objects with mitzvahs. You do mitzvahs, with objects that are external to you. It's only when you learn Torah that your being becomes one with godliness, right? It's like eating food, right? That you eat the food and the food becomes one with you. So that's why we're talking here specifically Torah for its own sake, which learning it for its own sake is one of the big conditions of this happening correctly and in the most correct way. And so, why is it the reward of Torah that this divine reward, that this godliness becomes one with them? Because that is the avodah that they did. That's the service of God they did in this world. In other words, what's Gan Eden really? As we know in Chassidus, the simple understanding. What's the reward of Gan Eden? The reward of Gan Eden is that you can see the truth of everything that you did in this world, right? You perceive how great the mitzvahs were that you did. You perceive the holiness of the Torah that you became one with, right? So what are the tzaddikim who learn Torah Lishma rewarded with in Gan Eden? That they become one with the godliness, right? With that godliness that's within the Torah that they learned. Yeah, and that is the greatest pleasure of the soul, that the soul grasps the godliness of the holy things that they did in this world. So therefore, right, this is why it's the Alter Rebbe's example, because he takes it to the utmost, right? Just like we did with Moshe Rabbeinu in prophecy, that if it's true by him, it must be true by everything else. So too, what is the deepest connection between the soul, which is a creation, and the revelation of God in the Garden of Eden is the reward for learning Torah, that the soul becomes deeply united and profoundly one with this godliness that's within the Torah. It has a direct experience of God, and not from the outside, right, but as the act of becoming, right, like eating. It becomes their sustenance, right? They become one. Their existence becomes one with this expression of godliness. And yet, it continues to exist. It is only an experience in the world of Bria. It continues to exist as a place called the Garden of Eden. How can you have both of these things? How can they have the direct experience of godliness and yet remain in existence as the soul in the Garden of Eden? That's the question. Yes, Matzah.
It continues to exist.
What does?
It being what?
Oh, pardon me, the soul. Pardon me. The soul continues to exist.
But the question is that I'm trying to utter for 45 minutes already.
Sorry.
And so the experience of a soul, when it goes to Ziva Shechina, of the experience of Ziva Shechina,
yeah,
of a soul of a tzaddik and a soul of no tzaddik is different?
It depends what it depends. It's a good question. It depends what it means here. Often when we say in the Shamas of tzaddikim, with tzaddikim means Jews. Often. It depends what the context is. Yeah. It depends. It depends what we mean. That's a fair question. I don't know.
Very tough answer, because if you have to do nothing because you're Jewish, then it's like
No, because we're saying it's for receiving the reward for learning Torah Lishma. The only question is this reward that we're describing, is it conditional on the person being a tzaddik otherwise? Right? In other words, is it anyone who learns Torah Lishma? Learning Torah Lishma is a very high accomplishment. Learning Torah for its own sake, right? We have to do a lot of work to piece through all the other reasons we learn Torah, right? Instead of learning it for its own sake. Yeah? The only question is, Ronnie's question is that just, but when it says Neshamas of Tzaddikim, does it mean only tzaddikim, or does it mean anyone who learns Torah Lishma? I'm inclined to think it means anyone who learns Torah Lishma. It says Neshamas of tzaddikim, it just means Jewish souls, right? Which are, of course, the soul in the next world would not be called by the same terms as we would categorize people in this world. In other words, it's the differentiation between a tzaddik and a benani, right, and a rasha in this world, when we're talking about a complex, as Tanya explains at great length, a complex relationship between the godly soul and the animal soul and the body, right, and the war that they have over our behavior, right. In the next world, all of that's kind of moot, right. There is no free choice for behavior. There's no various limbs of the body to be matahir. There's nothing to be mevarer, right? All of the different things that the soul does to serve God in this world, right, sort of becomes, it's a question of what use they have, if it's still relevant, right? Because as we learn after the first chapter of Tanya, right, that it's only as a borrowed term that that the names tzaddik and rasha are used to refer to the reward and punishment, right? So when in the afterlife, which is really reward and punishment, right, in Gan Eden, right, there's also the idea of Mashiach, which maybe we'll mention in a minute, but the Mashiach's a whole other idea. But the generally speaking, when we're talking about the reward and the punishment, the terms as we define them in Tanya may not be as applicable. So the shortest answer is I don't know. Slightly longer is I suspect it means any Jew who learns Torah Lishma. Is the second answer. All right. So you have the soul, and it has this deep and inner experience of godliness. It doesn't just perceive godliness, but it becomes one with godliness, like food becomes one with the body. And yet they continue to exist. How is this possible? And the Alter Rebbe answers. Let's continue reading. We will read what it says, and then we will try and understand what it says. We're on the second line of 874. In the English, ki mehispashtus in the Hebrew. Second line of 874. Ki mehispashtus, mehispashtus shtemidus elu, from the extension of these two traits, God's kindness and God's self-withholding, right, his severity, his self-limitation. Nimtach Rakia al neshama shebegan Eden. A firmament is spread over the souls that are in Gan Eden. We'll speak about what this means in a moment. V'rakia zeh nikra raza de'oraisa. This firmament is called raza de'oraisa, which means the secret of Torah. And in this firmament is the secret of the 22 letters of the Torah, which are given by these two divine traits. From his right hand he gave them a fiery law. Let's continue the reading. It won't do any help to separate. It won't do any help to interrupt here, so let's just keep reading it and then we'll explain it. From this firmament drips dew as food for the neshamas. What is this dew? The knowledge to the soul that the souls get of the 22 letters of the Torah. And this firmament is the secret of Das, the third svira, right? Chachma, Bina, and then Das, the Daled in Chabad, right? The third svira. This is the secret of this firmament. Okay, let's start. Let's pause here.
No, actually, continue.
I know. There's a little more, but let's pause here, and we'll do the end at the end, God willing. Let's pause and explain a little bit. The short version of the answer to this question is again The Torah. The answer is the Torah. Just as we said before, why is it that the water, when there's a miracle, does not cease to exist? Why is it that when there's a miracle, we don't see pure godliness, right? We see rather that the water continues to exist, but it's doing something miraculous. We said, why is that so? Because in the creation of the water, it wasn't just spoken into existence by God, it was also part of the Torah that it was created. Right? And now we have to explain that more, because now the Alter Rebbe is mentioning it explicitly, right? It's not just something we learn out from one word, the Alter Rebbe said. The Alter Rebbe is saying here that the secret to all of this is Torah, right? Fundamentally, why are the souls able to continue to exist, even though they directly grasp an infinite expression of godliness? The answer is that there's something called the rakia. There's a special firmament that is spread out for them, whatever that means. We'll talk more about what that means in a second. There is a special godly act, which is called the spreading of the firmament. This spreading of the firmament is by the power of Torah, and it's by the power of Torah that the souls are able to both exist as a limited being and internally internalize an infinite experience of godliness. Right? Yes.
Okay, so now when we refer to the Torah here,
yeah,
we're talking about really the ephemeral wisdom.
1 second. I'm going to tell you a lot more.
What's ephemeral?
Abstract. He means more.
And there's another question related. He's talking about mazon and neshamot.
Yeah.
For us, mazon, without mazon, we cannot survive.
Right.
The question is that the neshamot in Gan Eden, do they need to get this mazon, or this is just in addition to what the...
Well, let me answer your question immediately, because the reason why it's called mazon is not because they need it to survive. It's called mazon because it becomes one with them, right? Just like the mazon on the earth, right? A metaphor. It's a metaphor, right? Which one's the metaphor for which is really a question. But the bottom line is that the two ideas are connected by the fact that it becomes one. It's a yichud pnimi. It's not just that they perceive the godliness from the outside, but they and the godliness actually become one, right? Which makes the question stronger, right? Just like food becomes one with the body, so the godliness that they perceive becomes one with the neshama in Gan Eden.
On the other hand, mazon is like fuel. Without the fuel, you cannot drive.
No, we're saying that's not the outcome. We're saying that's the essence. That's actually what mazon is, right? Mazon, the whole. If you really want to get technical, the whole spiritual mode. I don't know how to say it in a way that's simple English, but the whole spiritual mode, the whole inyan of mazon, the whole idea of mazon is the idea of a yichud pnimi, is the idea that something that is outside of you can become completely one with you. Every other effect of mazon is a totzah from this, right? For example, the Alter Rebbe says in Likutei Torah that food, this is a total non sequitur for those paying attention, just so you know. The Alter Rebbe says in Likutei Torah that the reason why food provides sustenance, it keeps the person alive, right, is because the food comes from Doimim Tzemeach and Chai, and Doimim Tzemeach and Chai receive their chayas from Olam HaTohu, whereas the Neshama receives its chayas, at least ostensibly, at least in the obvious way, from Olam HaTikun, right? Olam HaTikun is very weak naturally and cannot self-sustain itself. It needs chayos from the Olam HaTohu to sustain. That's how the Alter Rebbe explains eating for fuel in Likutei Torah, right? So you see, the fuel aspect has to do with details, right? This thing that is becoming one with the soul has a root in Olam HaTohu, so it keeps the soul alive. But what's the essence of the food, right? You could have some foods from Olam HaTohu, some food from this place, some food from that place. But what is all food? It's a godliness which becomes one with the neshama. Right? But it happens to be that food sustains the person because it has a chayis from Tohu, which becomes one with the neshama, for the chayut from Olam HaTohu. You understand what I'm saying? So all food is the idea of something outside becoming one with the neshama. Right? The fact that it's fuel happens to be because it comes from Olam HaTohu, it comes from this specific place, and that chayos is given to the neshama, as the Alter Rebbe explains. So Al Pi Chassidus, the essence of food is the unification, right? All the other things are tzedadi, are incidental. What was I going to say? Why does the soul able to be a limited being in a limited world and yet perceive infinite godliness and become one with that infinite godliness as food, right? And yet still remain limited? And the answer is because of the Torah. The answer is Torah. There is something called a rakia. There is a divine act done, which is called here the spreading out of the firmament. This spreading out of the firmament allows the limited soul to have this taste of infinity and yet remain in existence. This is the power of the Torah. What does this mean? What does this mean? What is this Torah that we're talking about here? What does it mean that by the power of the Torah it's allowed to exist? So let's go over a couple of general ideas about Torah and we'll try and understand. First of all, this function of the Torah, right, that the Torah allows the infinite and the finite to unite is something that we see in a different place, right, in a different context. What's the context we see this? We see this in the context of Mashiach, right? When Mashiach comes, and specifically in Tchias HaMesim, the resurrection of the dead, which is one of the 13 principles of faith, right? That every Jew believes that when Mashiach comes, as we await his coming daily, the dead will be resurrected, right? What the resurrection of the dead, it says, will take place with what's called Tal Torah. The dew of the Torah is what will be used to resurrect the dead, right? Stam teaching. What does that mean? Because what's Mashiach, right? It's the same idea we're saying here. What's Mashiach? Mashiach is that godliness should be fully revealed within the world. The world should be the world, and yet godliness should be entirely revealed there, right? How is this possible? Through the power of the Torah, the Tal Torah, the dew of the Torah, right? Which dew always indicates the secrets of the Torah, the inner aspect of the Torah, which here we're also talking about Raza D'Oraisa, the secrets of the Torah, right? So just as in Mashiach's times, when it's the secrets of the Torah, the dew of the Torah, which will resurrect the dead and allow godliness to express itself within the limited world and yet be fully expressed, so too, even now in Gan Eden, there's something like that, where the soul, which is a limited being in the world of Gan Eden, which is a created world, is able to withstand, so to speak, and to exist, even though they have this deep relationship with this infinite expression of godliness. That's one idea, yeah.
So this means that there will no longer be a concealment.
Correct.
In the Messianic age.
Yes, correct. Correct.
And yet the world will not be nullified towards the godliness.
The world will be as it is, and yet God will be entirely revealed within it,
It's a
yes.
contradiction.
So it won't be crazy. So people, it won't be a perfunctory experience. Meaning, so what? In other words, people will realize is what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
It won't be something. It's not. Oh, well, big deal. It won't be a big deal experience. It'll be. There has to be a sense of awe.
Yes.
Right? Otherwise, it would just be mundane.
Oh, it's a deep question. It's a very good question. The answer is, what time is it? What is the time?
2050.
2050. The answer is yes and no. It's a very good question. Spencer's question, in other words, if you don't mind, and stop me if I'm saying anything that's totally wrong, is that on the one hand we say that the world will be basically the same. The world will remain the world, and yet godliness will be revealed when Mashiach comes. On the other hand, doesn't this mean that the experience of godliness will be without a true sense of the greatness of godliness, right? It will be, so to speak, less miraculous even than miracles that happen in history. So where will be the sense of godliness, right? And the truth is that they're both right, in a sense. In a sense, you're right. In a sense, Mashiach's coming, right? It's the famous question, right? Someone once asked, who did they ask? Was it the Rebbe? It may have been a different Rebbe. I can't remember. Someone once asked, how will I know when Mashiach comes? And they told them it'll be written about in the papers, right? That's how you'll know when Mashiach comes, right? They'll write about it in the paper. Now we'd say you'll see it on Facebook, right? It'll be on the news, right? In other words, there is an idea, you're right, of a less awe-inspiring experience. On the other hand, despite the fact that it's less awe-inspiring, this is a far more profound and deep and complete expression of godliness, right? In other words, the way it's explained is that the whole reason that there needs to be a miracle, why nature has to be broken, right, to reveal God at the splitting of the sea, is because the nature and God are fundamentally antithetical, which means, in a sense, there's a limitation on the godliness that is revealed. Godliness can be revealed, but only in a way that is awe-inspiring, only in a way that does totally break with the regular experience, right? The whole idea, as Mashiach is described, is that it will be a break but not a break. Everything will be completely different, and yet everything will remain exactly the same. In other words, one way it's described, and I'll just finish this little digression, side point on this note, is that it says that just as nowadays, the world, the physical world, is the baseline experience. And to this physical world, we are trying to always explain to ourselves what godliness is like, what spirituality is like. As soon as Mashiach comes, the two realities are reversed. So in other words, just as we take the physical world for granted, then we will take the spiritual world for granted. Right? Just as it is not a wondrous experience to see the table, there's nothing wondrous about it, right, in regular human experience, so too it will not be wondrous to see the godliness that is constantly creating the table. What will we have to work to explain to ourselves how there is also a physical reality to the table? Right? So in other words, everything stays the same. The table is still the table. It's just that what is the obvious aspect and what is the aspect that will be explained are flipped. So in a sense, you're right. In a sense, it's regular. Everything stays the same. In another sense, everything is completely different. Right? The table will be seen for what the table really is, which is godliness. Right? And the physical will be totally beyond. People will sit around and talk about the table actually as a physical existence, but it's impossible for anyone to understand. Just like we talk about at Tzidus.
So there's one difference.
Right? Yeah.
We will have experienced the physical side of it first.
Yeah, but the thing is,
we may not see
we're going to lose our attachment. We're going to lose part of our memory, right? That's why it says in the Hayom that after Mashiach comes, everyone's going to be full of regret because we could have done so much and done so many mitzvahs with all those physical things when it was so easy. And when Mashiach comes, everybody's going to be full of regret because now we've lost our direct access to that physical, and we're going to appreciate what it is that we were doing when we put on the tefillin, right, or when we said a bracha over the food, right? When Mashiach comes, is saying the bracha over the food is obvious. It's the physical aspect of the food, which is what the mitzvah was previously done with. That's going to be mysterious, right? So just as nowadays we sit around and try and understand the divine source of the table and fail miserably, so when Mashiach comes, we're going to sit around and try and understand the physical manifestation of the table and fail miserably.
It's kind of hard to understand because the spirit.
It's very hard to understand.
Yeah, but the relation with God is the most important thing.
Yeah.
If this becomes obvious, what else would you need?
Because it's not just about but now, before Mashiach comes, everything is about the transition from mundane to holy. But don't worry, once we transition to holy, we're going to find out that there's a whole infinite process of holiness, higher and higher and higher, with no limit, right? Because there's no reaching God. There's no ultimate. That's the thing about God, right? Once you eat Oreos, you know just about everything there is about eating Oreos. But God, thank God, is not an Oreo. God is God. There's an infinite amount to discover. There's an infinite amount to experience. There's an infinite number of pleasures and new things and new things to discover, right? When Mashiach comes, we're only going to start studying the Torah, right? And study it and its secrets for all time, right? Now, in the last negative 5 minutes, I have to finish the rest of what I wanted to say in this class.
You have room for one quick one?
A very quick one.
Does the Mashiach have to be a person, or could it be just an aura?
Al pi halacha, it has to be a person. Judaism, it has to be a person. The Rambam says it's a person.
Be a teacher.
The Rambam says that it has to be a human being from the physical house of David. And that is what Jewish law says. And no one is permitted to argue on the law. The Rambam is the Pesach. Maimonides was the last one who wrote on Jewish law on these matters. And we follow the last opinion. And we are not in any position to argue with the Rambam. It is a human. Mashiach is a human being, as the Rebbe emphasized repeatedly, and then people worked very hard to misunderstand him. We'll leave it at that.
Mashiach ben Binyamin, not necessarily as a person.
I don't know, Ronnie.
Will the Mashiach be perceived as God incarnate?
No. There's no God incarnate in Judaism. There's no such thing. God forbid. God forbid. The Mashiach was Moses perceived as God incarnate, right? Well, it says in the Midrash that just as Moses was the first Redeemer, Moses will be the final Redeemer. It's another person like Moses. If that's all, right? Yeah. Okay, why does the Torah have this power, right? You're asking a question, are we talking about Torah in the ephemeral sense? What do we mean by Torah, right? We're talking about Torah, the hint here is that it's das. It says it's das, right, which is the third sphera, which das, you should know, is associated with Torah, generally speaking. Das, I don't have the time to draw you the whole picture, right, but das is on the Mavriach HaTichon. Das is on the middle row of the spheres as they're drawn in 3 rows, right? You have Das, Tiferes, Yesod, and Malchus, and Keser at the top are all in the middle, right? You have a right side with Chesed, you have a left side with Gvura. Right is kindness, left is severity or self concealment, and then you have the middle. Das is in the middle. It's the first sphere of the 10 spheres. If you're not counting Keser, it's a whole different story. But in the regular way, we normally list the 10 spheres. It's the first of the 10 spheres that's in the middle. Yes. We're talking about Torah as the Torah is connected with Das. What does this mean? Let me explain it quickly. We say God spreads out a firmament for the soul. What's the firmament, right? A firmament is a rakia, right? The rakia literally translated means firmament, which is a useless translation, right? The rakia in Bereshis, in the creation of the world, right? It says Yehi rakia, let there be a firmament, right? It says the firmament is referred to as shamayim, which is normally translated as heaven, which is another almost as useless word. Rashi says, and the Baal HaTurim gives like 20 different reasons why it's called shamayim. That's probably an exaggeration. But the Baal HaTurim, if you read him on when it says shamayim in Bereshis bar Elokim es hashamayim, right? All different words for shamayim, all different sorts of things. But Rashi says, if you go look there, that shamayim is a what's the word? It's a portmanteau, right? It's 2 words put together. Eshumayim, fire and water. As we know in the Svirus, fire always is connected with Gvura. Water is always connected with chesed. Fire ascends from below to above, right? It burns with heat, it burns with passion. Water descends from above to below. Water is chesed, right? Water gives life to all things. Gvura elevates all things to their source. I can't get into the whole story now, but water is associated with chesed. Gvura is associated with fire. Shamayim, rakia, is a synthesis, right? Which is why it's Torah that the rakia comes from, right? Because Torah is associated with Das, it's associated with Tiferes, it's the middle path, where you find the middle, right? You have fire on the left, water on the right. What's in the middle? What brings them together is the Torah. Right? So it says God puts out a rakia, he puts out a firmament. That means that from the place where chesed and gvura, where these 2 opposites can be one, right? God bestows a certain power to the neshama, right? That power is called Torah. It's called Das. That power that he gives it allows it to experience chesed and gvura, the divine revelation. It allows it to, well, let's put it this way. It allows it to experience the divine revelation, which is chesed, and yet remain in existence, which comes from gvura, right? It lets it experience the havaya, right, which is associated with water, right? And yet it remains in existence with Shem Elokim. In other words, what allows the 2 things to exist together? What allows the neshama to exist as a limited existence, right? Which comes mostly from gvura, while perceiving the infinity of God, which is expressed by chesed. What allows them to survive both together is the Torah, which exists in the middle, which is a synthesis, right? Just like we spoke about and have spoken about many times in this class by now, and we spoke about in the Hanukkah class as well, just like the place of the ark, right? Both had a place and did not have a place. It took up space and did not take up space. And what was kept in the ark, right? The original Luchos, right? The first version of the Torah, Torah 1.0, right, was kept in the ark. Why is it that the place of the ark synthesized space and no space, right? Gvura and chesed? It's because the Torah was there, right? In other words, the same idea. It's the same idea. The opposites are able to come together because of the Torah. The Torah, just as the Torah allows miracles not to destroy the world, right? It allows the water the infinite expression of God in the miracle of the splitting of the sea, not to annihilate the water, not to make the water totally not exist. It doesn't make the water totally one with godliness, but allows the water to remain water, and yet have a miracle, right? Just as Torah allows that to happen, because when God said, "Let there be water" in the 6 days of creation, it was part of Torah, right? Meaning to say that it derived from Das. These two opposites are both in the context of Torah. The Torah is God contextualizing his two opposite tendencies of self-revelation and self-concealment, right? Because they're both given context by Torah, that allows them to both exist simultaneously. In other words, Torah is the place. We're not saying the physical scroll, obviously. We're saying Torah is that aspect of godliness which allows opposites to come together. It gives everything its context, right? Torah says, right? Torah says, let me tell you a story. How far over time are we? Not too bad. Not too bad. Okay, let me tell you a story, right? Famous story. One of my favorite stories. It says that the Frierdiker Rebbe, right, the Rebbe's father-in-law, right? The Rebbe's father-in-law was the Lubavitcher Rebbe from 1920 to 1950, right? Very tumultuous, difficult times, right? Both in Russia, where he was from, and in the rest of the world as well. So the Frierdiker Rebbe was once traveling, and it said he reported that he was approached by various Jews, and the Jews are having an argument, right? The argument was, as was a common argument at the beginning of the 20th century, to the sorrow of all, right? They were arguing over which was the best form of government, right? One said, form of government, memshalah. Right? One was a monarchist, right? He said we should all go back to when we had the Tsar. That was better, right? And one was a communist and said, no, what do you mean? The communists are right. They have the best rule. And the other one was a capitalist or whatever it was, a liberal. He wanted a democracy, freedom for all, whatever. Everyone had these Jews are all arguing over what's the best. It was probably two Jews with 15 opinions, right? One Jew had 7 and the other Jew had 8. So they were arguing over what's the best form of government, right? And every one that they said was the best, they brought a proof from the Torah, right? The monarchists said, what do you mean? Kings in the Torah. The ancient Torah says, prescribes enforced taxes on everyone. The poor weren't allowed to go hungry, and the Torah didn't allow the rich just to have their wealth and not to give any money to the poor, right? And the liberals said, but what do you mean? The Torah didn't. There was no coercion, right? There were certain people that were you were expected to give tzedakah on your own regard, whatever it was. The king only ruled by consent of the governed, right? A true king was only the king that was inaugurated and chosen by the people. A whole thing, right? Everybody has a proof from their Torah that their thing is the correct, right? I'm elaborating on the story, but you see the idea. So they saw that the Frierdiker Rebbe was traveling with them, and they went and asked the Frierdiker Rebbe's opinion. They said, which one does the Torah support? And the Frierdiker Rebbe says that every man-made idea, right? Every idea that comes from the human intellect, every form of government that human beings conceive of, right? The good part of that thing which they've thought of is the part that's from Torah, and the rest is the part that makes it not agree with Torah, or the rest of it is the part that makes it a human idea, right? Every human system has things that the Torah agrees with, and that's the part of it that's true. That's the part of it that's correct, right? The rest of it is what makes it not what the Torah says. Right? In other words, the Torah, what the Frierdiker Rebbe was basically saying is that the Torah is synonymous with truth. Right? The Torah is synonymous with truth. There's no such thing as building a true system based on the Torah that's not the Torah. Right? If it was true and it was based on the Torah, it itself would be Torah. The Torah is synonymous with truth, right? Which we see in the part of the Torah that we're studying now, right? In the Parshias, because we know that Avraham, father Abraham, was associated with Chesed, Yitzchak with Gvura, and Yaakov, right, with Tiferes or Das, right? And Yaakov's trait above all was he was Yeshiv Eilis, right? He sat and he studied Torah. That was what was significant about Yaakov. He was a Torah studier. Torah and Yaakov are associated one with another. And what was special about Yaakov? What was special about Yaakov compared to his father and his grandfather is that Mitase Shlema, all of his children, right, remained within the path, right? True, they had disagreements. It's a long story to that as well, as we're seeing in all these parashiyos. But the bottom line is that Avraham gave birth to Yishmael, and Yitzchak gave birth to an Esav. But all of Yaakov's children are Jewish, right? That's why we're Bnei Yisrael, right? The children of Yaakov, right? The nation is only the children of Yaakov. Yitzchak had some children that didn't become Bnei Yisrael. Avraham had a child that wasn't Jewish, right? The Jews come from Yaakov. Why is that? Right? Kabbalistically, the Kabbalistic explanation is this explanation, right? That the Torah is the truth of everything, right? Yaakov was the person, because he was connected to Torah, that was able to see that there's something correct about chesed, but there's also something correct about gvura, right? And each one of his 12 sons had a different way of serving God, and he could see how each one of his 12 sons, there was something correct about them. And because all of them were connected, because all of them had a place in Yaakov's vision, right? Which is another way of saying, because everything has a true aspect, has something which lends it truth because it's part of Torah, right? They were all able to coexist eventually, right? You have to still explain the story of how they didn't coexist at first. But eventually, right, they all coexist. All the children of Yaakov, right? They make one Am Yisrael, one people. This is the trait of Torah. Torah is the line of truth which runs through everything, right? We say emes, right? Emes is Aleph Mem Taf, the first letter, the middle letter, and the last letter of the alphabet, right? That all of the letters, all of the different aspects of truth, right? The beginning, the middle, and the end, right, are all in Torah. So this idea that it's the Torah that lets the soul be both limited and unlimited is because the Torah is that which says that limitation has something that's true about it, God's infinitude has something that's true about it, and they're both part of Torah. Why do they have to contradict, right? By the Torah is the godly place where there's no contradiction, right? Everything can exist the same. Everything has an aspect that's true. Yeah? So fundamentally, it's the Torah which allows the soul to remain limited and yet have a deep and internal relationship with the infinite. Because from the Torah's perspective, neither one is more true, right? Neither the chesed of Avram nor the gvura of Yitzchak is more true from the perspective of Yaakov, right? They're both equally true. They're both part of Torah. So too, in the worlds above. So the answer, the Alter Rebbe's answer ultimately to how the souls can have this direct grasp of an infinite expression of godliness and yet remain finite is because God makes this rakia, He makes this shemayim, He makes this combination, this synthesis of chesed and gvura. He is able, from the place of Torah, to allow both things to exist at once. That's fundamentally the Alter Rebbe's explanation here. Let's just finish the chapter quickly. The Torah is the food of the souls in Gan Eden. The mitzvahs are only clothes, right? The Alter Rebbe is bewarning a question you might have. The Alter Rebbe is saying, but what about mitzvahs, right? Torah, we see that it's the power of the Torah which lets them remain finite and access infinitude. But what about mitzvahs? And the Alter Rebbe says, what about mitzvahs? Torah is something that the soul becomes one with, but mitzvahs, as we were saying before, is only a clothing. So you don't need any special power, right? Any special divine action or divine expression, like through Torah, that the soul and mitzvahs should be able to coexist. The soul and the experience of his mitzvahs, because the experience of mitzvahs is always from the outside. It's not that it becomes one with the limited experience of the soul. The soul has some sort of perception of something which is above it, which is the experience of its mitzvahs. Yeah? Kamavur kol zeh b'Zohar v'Yakel daf reish tes v'reish yud b'Etz Chaim Shar Mem Daled Perek Gimel. All of this is explained in the Zohar and v'Yakel, page 209 and 210, if you want to look it up, and in Etz Chaim Shar 44, chapter 3. And we see here at the end of the chapter there's a closed parentheses, right? And this is where once upon a time, according to the Rebbe, there were two closed parentheses to close the brackets that we opened in chapter 4. So we see that all of chapter 5 was answering and commenting on things that we learned in chapter 4. God willing, next week we will begin the next chapter, chapter 6.
Oh yeah.